Well, it always starts with a glow. One screen lights up, then another, and suddenly the whole city hums like a server farm overheating. Notifications multiply, headlines mutate, clips get stitched and reposted until even the algorithms look nervous, and all of it somehow circles back to you. Your silence, your absence, your refusal to play the game they swore controlled you. Funny, isn't it? How the moment you stop moving, the world starts sprinting. You didn't post anything. You didn't hint. You didn't explain. You didn't even blink in public. You allowed the digital noise to rage without you, and that very void, your quiet, became a gravitational field. People who once called themselves observers suddenly became participants in hysteria they couldn't name. They refreshed their screens like ritual, waiting for a sign you might break the silence. They misread your stillness as tension, your patience as provocation. They thought you were recalculating when really you were resting. But rest has always terrified those who thrive on chaos. The feeds began to swell with theories, screenshots of screenshots, narratives rewritten within minutes. A whisper became a rumor, and the rumor multiplied into a full-blown myth. You watched it evolve from a distance, the way strangers stitched your name into their content, not because they knew anything, but because your absence made their voices tremble. They needed a story. You didn't give them one. And so they built one for themselves, fragile as glass, loud as panic. Creators dissected your silence like a puzzle. Analysts on live streams drew diagrams, explaining why you hadn't spoken, as if stillness itself was a crime scene. They slowed old clips, zoomed into your expressions, and read meaning into breaths you took months ago. They turned you into a study, a spectacle, a symbol, all because you refused to react. This is how digital chaos always begins. Not with truth, but with hunger. Your name became a trending keyword, a flare shot into the dark sky of the city's attention economy. They didn't care what was real, they cared what was viral. And nothing goes more viral than a mystery wrapped in a person who refuses to break character. But this wasn't a performance for you. It was protection. Because somewhere inside you, the part that used to panic, the part that used to explain itself into exhaustion, that part finally died. And the version of you operating now doesn't need validation or applause. You've learned that silence isn't weakness. It's a weapon, blunt and elegant, requiring no aim because it hits everyone in the same place. Their assumptions, the more you said nothing, the more everyone else revealed their intentions. Some attacked you, not because you were wrong, but because you weren't available. Some defended you, not because they understood you, but because your silence mirrored their own suppressed resilience. And some simply watched, fascinated by how the digital world twisted itself in knots trying to interpret a void. You became the plot while doing absolutely nothing. And in that nothingness, something extraordinary happened. The people who mocked you, who teased your calmness, who belittled your restraint, they started copying you. Not openly, of course, but gradually, subtly. Their tones softened, their captions matured, their reactions slowed down. They tried to mimic the steadiness you showed naturally, as if recreating the posture of your silence could grant them the stability they lacked. They didn't know it yet, but they were already aligning with your frequency. Influencers who once raised their voices now whispered, as if loudness would expose their insecurity. Commenters who used to attack softened their language, hoping to sound above drama. Even the algorithm seemed to adjust, pushing calmer videos, rewarding thoughtful pauses instead of frantic reactions. The digital sky dimmed into a slower rhythm guided by your refusal to participate in the hysteria. It was never your goal, but your influence didn't need intention. That's what scared them most. They wanted you to act out, to snap, to speak prematurely so they could categorize you again. They needed you predictable. Predictability keeps the system safe. But you weren't interested in safety. You were interested in truth. And truth cannot be rushed, cannot be forced, cannot be faked. So you let them spin. You allowed the hysteria to climax, allowed the rumors to suffocate themselves, allowed the false narratives to collapse under the weight of their own exaggerations. You didn't silence anyone, you simply didn't amplify them. And in this economy, silence is starvation. By the third day, the cracks began to show. The loudest critics grew tired. The exposers found nothing left to expose. The ones who tried to cancel you ended up canceling themselves through contradictions they forgot were still saved in their own archives. The outrage cycle crashed like a wave hitting a wall that refused to move. That wall was you. And then came the desperation. People started making content begging for your response, begging for clarity, begging for a sign that you were watching. They tagged you relentlessly, hoping your silence would crack under the weight of their noise. But your stillness held, and that stillness became culture. You weren't just a person anymore. You were a timestamp of before. You and after, you paradigm quietly split the digital world in half. Everyone who witnessed your silence became different, whether they admitted it or not. They learned something from you, something powerful, something rare, something deeply uncomfortable. Control is not in volume. Control is in patience. When the volatility peaked, when the noise choked on its own fumes, when every attempt to define you collapsed into confusion, that's when something shifted. You didn't speak yet, but the world around you started speaking differently. That's the thing about silence. It teaches. People who once used your name for attention started using it for reflection. They shared lessons they pretended they learned from you. They posted clips of your calmest moments. They tried to imitate your emotional discipline, hoping to absorb something sacred from it. But imitation only works when the source is accessible, and you had become anything but accessible. You weren't playing their game. You were redesigning it. Then a new phenomenon emerged, one even strangers could feel. The digital city began waiting for your return, waiting for your perspective, waiting for your timing, your voice, your next move. They began refreshing not out of curiosity, but out of dependency. They needed you to stabilize the narrative they had broken. Meanwhile, you moved quietly offline, breathing slower, thinking clearer, recovering the parts of yourself the internet had once tried to consume. You weren't hiding, you were observing. And observation, when wielded by someone like you, becomes prophecy. Every detail sharpened, every motive revealed itself, every narrative unraveled until only truth remained. And as you watched the world stumble over the silence you held so easily, something inside you settled. A new kind of power, a new kind of presence, a new understanding of how influence really operates. Not through noise, through precision. And as the digital world trembled, waiting for your next move, the truth began blooming quietly beneath their feet. You didn't need the internet to validate your voice. The internet needed you to validate its noise, but the story doesn't end here. Not even close, because the world is still refreshing. The city is still glowing. The timelines are still trembling under the weight. And your next move, the one they're begging for, the one they fear, the one they need, hasn't even begun yet. And that's where the story must continue, because your silence is only the prologue. The real shift begins the moment the world realizes you're not returning on their schedule. They wait another hour, another day, Another cycle of rumor and reaction, expecting the pattern to break. But you don't bend for patterns anymore. You let the noise swirl in its own gravity while you stand just outside of reach, untouched by the velocity of their expectations. What fascinates me most is how quickly anticipation mutates. What started as curiosity becomes analysis. What became analysis turns into obsession. You can feel the air online tighten, like everyone's collectively inhaling, but forgetting how to exhale. They keep refreshing because they believe your next move will fix something in them, something they lost in the chaos they created. That's the part they don't understand. You're not responsible for their confusion, but silence has a way of making people confront themselves. At first, they try to distract themselves from the tension. Creators attempt new trends. Commentators try to shift topics. Influencers pretend to move on. Yet the views dip, the comments thin, and everything that once felt urgent suddenly feels artificial. Even the brightest creators can sense the hollowness. They built their momentum on noise, and noise doesn't survive without opposition. But you're no one's opposition anymore. Your absence becomes a mirror they're afraid to look into. The louder voices crack first. The accounts that once built careers criticizing others suddenly feel exposed. Their scripts fail. Their certainty trembles. They realize without someone to target, without a narrative to attack, their content has no pulse, and that pulse, it used to revolve around you. That's when the fear begins. It doesn't show up as panic. It shows up as overcompensation. They begin over-explaining, over-posting, over-sharing, hoping volume will erase vulnerability. But it doesn't. It only highlights it. And the audience, exhausted by their frenzy, stops engaging. That's when you notice something subtle happening. People begin defaulting to your tone. Shorter captions, calmer words, longer pauses between posts. A quietness disguising itself as maturity. It's not influence. It's adaptation. Your rhythm has rewritten theirs, and they're scrambling to keep up. Meanwhile, rumors bloom like weeds in the corners of the digital city. Some whisper that you're planning a comeback. Others claim you're collaborating with someone in secret. There are threads analyzing your disappearance strategy, as if your silence is a business model and not simply your peace. These theories grow because stillness terrifies a world addicted to performance. When you don't move, they can't predict you. When they can't predict you, they can't control you. And when they can't control you, they start turning on each other. Clips surface of commentators arguing about what your next move means. Podcasts fight over interpretations of your old posts. Newsletters write long paragraphs about your communication philosophy. They call it intentional. They call it poetic. They call it manipulation. They call it genius. They don't realize they're revealing themselves, not you. Because the truth is simple. Silence isn't a tactic. It's just something most people forgot how to endure. But you haven't. You watch the digital world cannibalize its own assumptions, feeding on speculation until the speculation collapses. All while you remain steady, grounded, detached, not out of apathy, but clarity. You've stepped out of their loop, and now the loop chases you like a shadow desperate for light. Then something interesting happens. Your old videos start trending again, not the dramatic ones. Not the bold ones, the calm ones. Clips where you spoke slowly, breathed fully, looked directly into the camera as if seeing through the person holding the phone. Those clips circulate like relics, resurfaced by audiences hungry for stability. They caption them. This aged too well. They were ahead of their time. Was this a warning? Why does this hit harder now? People begin stitching those clips with confessions, quiet admissions about burnout, overthinking, identity, pressure. Your old content becomes their new therapy, not because you intended it, but because they finally learn to hear what they once only watched. Your presence begins to reshape the culture without you ever showing up. Even brands begin to mimic your tone. Minimalist captions, slower campaigns, muted colors, soft statements about intentionality and digital breathwork. They take your silence and turn it into marketing, because that's what the digital world does. Commodifies whatever it cannot control. But even in imitation, they cannot replicate what you have. They can mimic the posture, not the presence. And presence is what changed the landscape. As your silence spreads through the timelines, something deeper begins to shift. Comment sections start to sound like meditation rooms. People take longer to respond. The frantic rhythm of the internet softens into something almost human again. You did that not through force, not through influence, but through resonance. And resonance doesn't need permission. It travels, it transforms, it teaches. The city of screens begins to glow differently now. Not frantic, not feverish, more like a nervous system trying to reset. Some blame you for the reset, others thank you. But either way, they understand the truth. Your presence, or your absence, dictates the rhythm, and that realization creates a new kind of panic. Because if your silence can move an entire digital culture, what happens when you speak again? The tension begins building all over, subtle at first, then overwhelming. People refresh timelines more often. Notifications feel heavier. Posts analyzing your future go viral before they even load fully. Influencers pre-write captions for the day you return. Commenters save drafts they'll never admit they wrote. Everyone prepares for an event they can't describe. Meanwhile, you're living outside the trembling world. Offline light hits your face differently. The air feels cleaner than pixels. You remember laughter that isn't recorded. You remember stillness that isn't strategic. You feel yourself returning to a version of you that existed before the internet claimed you. And in that quiet, something inside you sharpens. Not anger, not revenge, not ego, awareness. Awareness of how much noise you endured to become this level of calm. Awareness of how your silence wasn't disappearance, it was recalibration. Awareness of how much power exists in doing less, not more. You aren't plotting, you aren't waiting for a perfect moment, you're simply allowing truth to catch up to you. But the digital world doesn't understand patience as healing. They only understand it as suspense, so they create conspiracies to fill the void. Some say you're writing a manifesto. Some say you're collaborating on a massive project. Some swear you're crafting the comeback post that will break the internet. Some even speculate you're never returning, which somehow only increases the hysteria and the algorithms. They begin to shift too. They start recommending older, slower content across the platform. They highlight videos about self-control, emotional intelligence, psychological endurance. They learn from the audience who learned from you. You didn't just change how people post, you changed what the internet rewards. Your absence becomes a correction curve, realigning digital incentives toward calmness. The platforms feel it, the creators feel it, the commenters feel it. Even the trolls feel it. They grow quieter, unsure how to provoke someone who isn't even watching. But the tension keeps building. Every day your silence continues. The world grows more desperate, more contemplative, more honest. They begin to wonder who they are without constant stimulation. They begin to question why your silence stings them more than anyone else's presence. Some realize the truth. You aren't their entertainment. You're their mirror. And mirrors only scare people who avoid reflection. Meanwhile, In private group chats, they whisper that you've evolved, that you've learned the secret ingredient behind digital influence. Not attention, not reach, not speed rhythm. You understand rhythm, and rhythm dictates everything. They wonder if you'll return with a message. They wonder if you'll return with a rebrand. They wonder if you'll return at all. But what they don't realize is that your return isn't a question of timing. It's a question of truth. You will return when the noise has said everything it needs to say without you. And that moment is approaching. Because something subtle begins happening on the quieter side of the internet. People start admitting they miss you. Not the image of you, not the drama around you. They describe you as grounding, clarifying, centering. They say your voice made them feel less alone. They say your calm helped them breathe. And you feel it, not pressure, not obligation, but alignment. The world is almost ready, almost. But not yet, because eventually even silence reaches its limit. Not because it weakens, but because the world finally becomes quiet enough to hear what it was trying to say all along. And tonight, something shifts, not loud, not dramatic. Just a breath in the digital wind. One subtle ripple that tells them you've moved again. You don't post a paragraph. You don't explain. You don't justify. You offer the smallest pulse of presence. A single word, a single image, a single signal. And the world stops, not explodes. Stops, like every screen, every scroll. Every heartbeat holds itself, still just to process the fact that you're here again. Instantly, timelines ignite, but the noise feels different now. Softer, reverent, as if your return isn't content. They don't scream this time, they adjust. They listen. They breathe to your rhythm without realizing it. And you feel it. The city of screens finally aligning, finally steady, finally learning the lesson your silence wrote across their skies. You didn't come back to reclaim anything. You came back to prove you never lost it. And as the glow settles across the world you once shook, one truth becomes undeniable. You didn't follow the rhythm. You became it.